David had always believed that the land he grew up on was more than just acres of soil. Fences and trees, it was his family's legacy. His grandparents had built the old farmhouse at the edge of Maplewood, a quiet neighborhood that later fell under the control of a powerful homeowners association. For decades, his family celebrated weddings under the oak tree, shared summer dinners on the porch, and told stories of resilience during storms that had nearly wiped the property away. The ranch wasn't just a home, it was the very foundation of his identity. But when David's parents passed away and the property became solely his, things began to change. The HOA, which had been increasingly strict with its rules, suddenly turned its attention toward him. Letters began arriving in the mail, stamped with bold warnings, non-compliance notice, and violation of community standards. At first, he laughed them off, thinking they were just routine reminders that didn't apply to his historic property. He was wrong. The HOA president, Ms. Calloway, was determined to modernize the neighborhood. She believed David's ranch was an eyesore among the neat rows of manicured lawns and pastel-colored houses. "This place drags down property values," she would say at meetings, her voice sharp and cold. Other board members nodded reluctantly, but David knew most of them had grown up respecting his family. Still, none were brave enough to challenge her authority. Soon, the notices escalated. David was fined for the old wooden fence, for the unapproved barn his grandfather had built in the 1960s, even for the family's traditional stone well. Each letter felt like an attack not just on him, but on the memory of his parents and grandparents. The HOA wasn't just targeting his property, they were trying to erase his family's history. David sat on his porch one evening, holding one of the letters in his hand as the sun dipped below the horizon. The oak tree's shadow stretched across the yard, reminding him of the countless moments his family had shared under its branches. His fists clenched. "They won't take this away from me," he whispered to himself. But the HOA wasn't finished. Weeks later, he received a notice stating that the board had voted to enforce a full compliance renovation if David didn't bring the property up to modern HOA standards within 60 days. They would move forward with legal action to seize and resell the land. The word sent chills through him. This wasn't about grass height or fences anymore. This was about destroying his family's legacy and replacing it with something that fit their vision. Anger welled up inside him, but so did resolve. He remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell him, about fighting for what mattered, about standing tall when others tried to push you down. David realized he couldn't just defend the ranch. He had to create something so meaningful, so powerful, that no HOA could ever touch it. That night, he sketched out an idea on a worn piece of notebook paper. It wasn't just about saving the property anymore. It was about building something that would honor his family and stand as a reminder to everyone in Maplewood that legacy could not be erased by rules, fines, or paperwork. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew one thing for certain. The HOA had picked the wrong man to underestimate. David looked at the glowing windows of the neighborhood houses beyond his ranch and whispered, "This land holds more than rules can measure, and I'm about to show them why." The fight for his family's legacy had just begun. David woke up the next morning with his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. Legacy isn't about what you own. It's about what you build for others to remember. He knew the HOA wanted to erase the physical marks of his family's past, but what if he turned the ranch into something greater than just a home? Something that would carry his family's name forward in a way no board, no president, and no set of rules could take away. He spent the first few weeks walking the land, revisiting the barn, the oak tree, and even the weathered stone well. Each corner of the ranch held a story. But to the HOA, all they saw was outdated, non-compliant property. To David, it was the perfect foundation for something that could inspire. One evening, as he stared at the notices stacked on his kitchen table, an idea sparked. What if he transformed the ranch into a community heritage center? Not just a place for himself, but for everyone in the neighborhood. A space where families could gather, children could learn history, and the community could celebrate traditions together. The HOA couldn't call that a violation. If anything, they'd look heartless trying to shut it down. David got to work. He contacted old friends of his parents, local carpenters, masons, and farmers who had known the family for generations. They remembered the kindness of his grandparents, who had offered food during hard winters, and his parents, who had once opened the barn for neighbors when their houses lost power in a storm. One by one, they agreed to help him rebuild and reshape the ranch, not for money, but for respect. By day, David worked alongside them, repairing the barn into a hall that could host events. By night, he stayed up late drawing blueprints, filing paperwork, and researching ways to turn the land into a recognized non-profit heritage site. Every nail he hammered, every board he replaced, felt like a strike against the HOA's attempt to erase his family's past. The changes did not go unnoticed. Ms. Calloway, the HOA president, showed up one afternoon in her pressed suit and sharp heels, frowning at the sound of saws and hammers. "Mr. Carson," she said, crossing her arms, "you are not authorized to make these kinds of changes. This is still HOA-controlled property, and you are in violation of several—" David didn't let her finish. "This land is mine, and what I'm building is for everyone here, not just for me. You can't erase history, Ms. Calloway. You can try to cover it up with paint and fences, but you can't erase it." Her lips tightened, but for once she didn't have a quick comeback. She stormed off, muttering about further action. In the weeks that followed, curious neighbors started stopping by. At first, they came out of curiosity, wondering why David was putting so much effort into a property the HOA seemed determined to fight. But when they saw what he was building, the barn transformed into a warm, welcoming hall with photos of local history, the oak tree surrounded by benches carved from fallen wood, and the old well restored as a symbol of resilience, they began to understand. Soon, neighbors were volunteering. A retired teacher offered to curate stories about the neighborhood's past. A group of kids painted murals about family and friendship on the barn walls. Families brought recipes, photos, and heirlooms to display in the Heritage Center. The HOA had tried to make David an outsider. Instead, his project was making him the very heart of the community. By the time the 60-day deadline from the HOA arrived, the ranch was no longer just his property. It was a living monument. Dozens of neighbors gathered there daily, some to help, others to simply spend time in a place that felt authentic and welcoming compared to the sterile uniformity of the rest of the neighborhood. When Ms. Calloway returned with a stack of papers threatening legal seizure, she was met not just by David, but by nearly 50 neighbors standing behind him. Parents, children, elderly couples, all united. "This ranch isn't a violation," one of the neighbors spoke up firmly. "It's a gift to this neighborhood, and if the HOA tries to erase it, you'll be erasing all of us." David felt a swell of pride as he looked around. His family's legacy wasn't just surviving, it was growing stronger, carried by the people it had always been meant to serve. But deep down, he knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA wouldn't give up so easily. Ms. Calloway's cold glare made that clear. Still, David had built something untouchable. Not just walls or fences, but unity. And that was something no HOA rulebook could ever control. The stage was set for the final showdown. The morning of the hearing felt heavier than any other day. David stood in front of the barn, now proudly displaying the words, "Carson Community Heritage Center," carved into polished oak. Behind him, neighbors had gathered, offering quiet words of encouragement. He could feel their trust resting on his shoulders. For the HOA, this was supposed to be the day they ended his defiance. For David, it was the day he proved that a family's legacy could not be erased. The community hall where the meeting was held buzzed with tension. HOA board members sat in a neat row at the front, their suits pressed, their papers stacked like weapons. At the center sat Ms. Calloway, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She looked confident, certain this would be the final blow. David took his seat, his heart pounding, but when he glanced back at the crowd filling the hall, his nerves eased. Nearly half the neighborhood had shown up, families, seniors, children, most of them carrying signs that read, "History Matters" and "Our Legacy, Our Choice." The HOA began with their accusations. Mr. Carson has violated numerous community codes, one board member announced, adjusting his glasses. Unauthorized construction, failure to obtain approval, and refusal to comply with removal notices. This property has become a distraction, and the HOA moves to seize and repurpose it immediately. The words stung, but David stood tall. When given the chance to speak, he walked slowly to the front of the room. My family built that ranch long before there was an HOA. Every tree, every beam of wood, every story passed down. It's part of who we are. The HOA tried to erase that, but what we built isn't just for me. It's for everyone here. He gestured to the crowd. The barn is now a hall where our children can learn about their roots. The oak tree has become a place for gatherings and reflection. The old well stands as a reminder of resilience. This isn't a violation, it's a legacy, and it belongs to all of us. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, one by one, neighbors began to stand and speak. A retired teacher lifted her hand. I've lived here 30 years. For the first time, I feel like this community has a true center, thanks to David. A mother with 2 children stepped forward. My kids painted murals in that barn. It gave them pride in where they live. That's worth more than any rule in a handbook. An elderly man's voice cracked as he said, David's family helped mine during the worst winter of my life. This heritage center honors that kindness. You can't take that away. The tide had shifted. The board whispered among themselves, clearly shaken, but Ms. Calloway wasn't ready to surrender. She rose from her chair, her voice sharp. This is irrelevant sentimentality. Rules are rules, and the HOA exists to enforce them. If we allow one exception, where does it end? David met her eyes, calm but firm. It ends when rules stop serving people and start destroying them. A community isn't about power. It's about connection. You can't erase that, no matter how many fines or threats you send. The room erupted in applause. The board called for a private recess. Minutes felt like hours as the neighborhood waited. Finally, they returned, faces less certain than before. One member cleared his throat. After reviewing the evidence and the overwhelming community support, the board has voted. The Carson Ranch will be recognized as a community heritage site, exempt from standard HOA property restrictions. Gasps filled the room, followed by cheers. People hugged each other, clapping David on the back. The HOA had been forced to back down, not because of rules, but because the people stood together. Ms. Calloway sat rigid, her defeat written across her face. For all her authority, she had underestimated the strength of legacy and the unity it could inspire. That evening, the ranch glowed with lanterns as neighbors celebrated under the great oak tree. Children laughed, music played, and stories of the community's past were shared late into the night. David stood quietly to the side, watching the joy around him. For the first time in years, he felt his family's presence, not in the shadows of what was lost, but in the light of what had been rebuilt. His grandfather's words returned to him. Legacy isn't about what you own, it's about what you build for others to remember. David realized he had done just that. The HOA had tried to erase his family's legacy, but instead, he had built something they could never touch, something alive, something lasting. And as he looked at the ranch, no longer just his home, but the heart of the neighborhood, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.